This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Hope Gander Goodwin and her husband retired after 45 years in the Foreign Service. She published her autobiography when she lived in Cambodia 25 years ago. Her new book, Tales of Travel, Love, and Survival in the Foreign Service, tells the rest of the story. Hope was so busy moving around and raising 6 kids, she didn't have time to take notes, so she relied on memories from her kids and letters to parents to write her book. How many countries did you live in, Hope?
We lived in 20 countries over a 45-year period. We worked for the U.S. Agency for International Development and also for university contractors or private sector during that period.
So what are some of the highlights that we're going to find in your book?
Well, some of the chapters that deal with extremely serious and dangerous situations in which we found ourselves, readers have really been mesmerized by those chapters that sound like fiction rather than reality. And all of these terrifying events caused nightmares that haunted me for years. There were 4 chapters in particular that people have found thrilling. One is called Trapped Between Two Tanks, and that took place in Bolivia, as 2 youngest daughters and myself were in a vehicle truly trapped between 2 tanks while they killed 4 snipers in front of us. And then, again, leaving Bolivia, the Drug Enforcement Agency film escapade, they gave me film to carry back to the U.S., and I didn't know what was in it. This was common when people would leave countries, they would ask you to take letters, and this particular one, the agency asked me to carry a cooler that had dry ice with film. I had no idea what it contained and only found out about 6 months later that it actually brought down the then president of Bolivia, who was a drug dealer. And we lost an engine on the plane and ended up having to spend a night in Colombia and in and out of customs with this cooler. It took me 54 hours to get from Bogota home to Missouri. Then when we lived in Tanzania during really difficult times during socialism in the early 80s, there was nothing to buy in the stores. We had to actually hunt for our food. And so I have a great chapter on a lion in camp, when a lion came up within a few feet of us during the night while we were sitting around the campfire. That's a fun chapter. Well, fun because we survived. And then the other chapter people talk about are surviving the evacuation from the Sudan, which was quite a nightmare. But I tried to incorporate the geographic and the political landscape of each country at the time that we lived there. And I also included goals and achievements and a few disappointments. It is not a political piece. When you hear Foreign Service, you think it might be, but it is a factual and hopefully interesting and educational book. And I also tried to paint a picture of what life for a Foreign Service family required of all of us. And I'm so proud of all of our children who are great citizens of this world and making their own contributions now. But the title, Tales of Travel, Love, and Survival, the travel part, a lot of readers have commented on how much they have enjoyed the chapters on our travels around the world. We always took advantage between assignments of stopping in Europe or wherever was en route. And we have been fortunate to visit over 127 countries and territories. What I'm most proud of, Alice, is the word that has been most used by the readers is inspirational. And that was, I really feel humble when readers convey that praise, but I'm really grateful that I was able to write this book. And I wrote it for our grandchildren and for future generations, just to have a better understanding of what Foreign Service entailed for us.
Yeah. Well, you say you have all these readers. How are you getting all these readers?
I have a lot of friends, and through church, lots of people bought the book. And we have a big family, so there was a lot of interest in it. Some who had read my first version really wanted to see the sequel. So I've sold several hundred books without even trying.
Well, that's amazing, Hope, but you've got some story there. Thank you. When Mary Wood's husband passed away after almost 50 years of marriage, she was profoundly affected, not just by her loss, but by becoming a widow. Yet she found inspiration nonetheless to write Widowhood, a user's manual.
It was a big loss in my life, a great hole. And I thought I was prepared. I had pre-planned his funeral because he'd been sick for several years. I had everything organized. And yet, when it actually happened, the reality was so different from what I anticipated. I thought I would be fine, and I wasn't. So I thought, how many other women are dealing with the same thing? It all comes down to the same thing. You have to do the same things. You've got to get a funeral director. You've got to plan a funeral. You've got to do all of this other stuff while you're walking around in this big cotton fog bowl.
Yeah. Well, so what does your book tell women to do?
There's an annotated list. It's a checkoff list that tells you exactly what this involves. It's in the front of the book. Before you ever get to the introduction or anything else, there's the list. And hopefully, if you are in this fog, most of the widows I know have been through that. In fact, I've interviewed 8 widows for this book. And we all had this same feeling immediately following the spouse's death. And so it needed to be approached. And it's not a book about grief. There's a bajillion books about grief. But you need to do this. And this is how you're going to feel, but you got to go do it anyway. The most important thing you have to do is a funeral director, because if you get a good one, and I had a great one, he'll take so much of this other stuff off of you. Now, if you know ahead of time that your husband is passing, you can go up ahead and establish a relationship with a local funeral director or, wherever in your town you think you need to go. And as I say, it's amazing how much they will take off of you. Stupid things like boutonnieres for pallbearers, prayer cards, and things that you would not think about in a million years. And he's thinking about them for you. The rest of the book is about my husband passing and what I went through the immediate days after his passing. Just how do you get through the funeral? Can you go to your closet and pull something together? Or do you have a sister who can run down to Macy's and do everything you need to do in the right size and the right colors? Just little things like that you are not tracking on how to get through the funeral, because his funeral turned out to be huge. I hadn't expected that. It just kind of blew my socks off. And of course my children were here and grandchildren and his family, but it was devastating. And so how do you get through this? How can you pull yourself together and face all of these hundreds of people and thank each one of them individually for coming? And the day never ended. I still have what I call tsunamis. You'll be out watering the garden and just not even thinking. And all of a sudden, it just drowns you. And it's almost like physically doubling you over. This sense of grief and loss and how vulnerable you are now and how lonesome you are now. I mean, your best friend is gone. There's nobody to talk to. I mean, there's everybody to talk to. You have friends, you have kids, but the one person in your life that you want to talk to isn't there. And then they kind of ease off. You go back to your watering your garden and you think, okay, I need to put some snail bait out here, and normal daily things trickle back in. I still get those. They're not as many. They're still as hard. The other widows I have spoken with, some of them had these kind of occurrences, and some of them did not. So I think it's how you approach things. And so it's going into my local bookshop. I have a friend who works for hospice in Southern California. It's gone into several hospice groups in Southern California. I am going to take it to hospice here. I gave a copy to my hospice nurse, grief counselor. So it's kind of spreading its way out that way. I'm 75, and so I have several friends in my age bracket whose husbands are failing. And they've already glommed onto the book, and they're telling everybody about it. So word of mouth is spreading. It's definitely a niche book. It's not something you're going to pick up to, flip through at your leisure. But if you need it, they tell me it's a lifesaver. But when I sat down to write the book, it was really funny. It flowed. I never thought what comes next. I never thought, well, now how am I going to follow that up? It just came. I sat down there in front of the computer, and out it came. It was amazing. I felt like Kelly was over my shoulder or something. I was just amazed that I could do that.
Somebody wanted you to do this.
Yes.
Thanks, Mary. George Vlasses teaches kindergarten in Illinois, so a children's book was a natural for him. But it took a while for him to get Helmet Man and the Chocolate Cake off the ground. For starters, it took him 2 years to find a publisher. What happened, George?
I was looking everywhere for a publisher, but it was hard to find one that would take it. I think with it being a first-time author, it's hard the first time. And I found Paige.
What's the book about?
I do a lot of true stories in my kindergarten classroom. And so I tell them about my childhood and my life. And one of my kindergartners one day said, you should make that story into a book. That's an awesome story. So I took one of my stories called A Chocolate Cake. It's a story about me baking a cake with my mom. And it's an adventure story. And during the whole process, I had my kindergartners help me do the illustrations throughout the book. That was pretty cool. But anyways, I was 5 years old and I made a cake. And while I made the cake, I didn't have my helmet. I always wore helmets when I was little. And I decided to turn the helmet upside down with all the chocolate batter inside. And I ran around the house, and my mom chased me, finally get caught. And my mom says, George Peter, your adventure has come to an end. Next thing you know, I'm back in the kitchen making up a new cake. And I say, I'll never wear a bowl on my head ever again.
Didn't the batter go all over the place?
Oh, it went everywhere. It was in the cabinets, on the tables, it was on the fan. It went everywhere. My mom was not very happy, but I had the best mom in the world. So she knew that's just what 5-year-olds do. You know, the little kids do sometimes.
The kids must love this.
Yes, they love the story. And it's kind of one of those things that when I told the story, they're so engaged. I'm like, you know what? When you look at libraries and books, there aren't many books that portray true stories. And my big push in kindergarten my past 17 years is to share your story. Because when you're sitting around the bonfire, you're sitting at dinner, those are the stories you tell. And if people don't share those stories, they never get passed on and they get lost. Right. And so one of my big things in kindergarten is we keep a journal of all the kids' stories, like when they go to the ice cream store. And one of our big writing moments is that now we have a journal at the end of the year with all these amazing stories that they could share with their family and friends. I actually did my first family reading night, read in front of large groups of kids and families, and they all loved it. I did a book signing, and it was awesome. So I'm getting into more districts to kind of get my name out there.
Can't have enough children's books out there.
You can. There's never enough books. Never.
That's right, George, and never too many breaks. We have to take one right now, but we'll be back right after these words.
Have you written a book and want to get it published? Then now's the time to call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099 and do it immediately. You see, they're looking for authors of all types of books, and unlike most publishers, Page Publishing will take the time to review most of the books submitted to them, and they'll even give you their feedback. And if they like what they read, Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, the Apple iTunes Store, and other outlets. They'll handle everything: copyright protection, printing, cover art, publicity, and editing. So if you've written a novel, a children's book, a cookbook, inspirational work, a book of poetry, or biography, and want to get it published, then you need to call Page Publishing and do it immediately. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. Your road to fame and fortune could very well start with this simple phone call. For your free author submission kit, call Page Publishing at 800-204-6099.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. James Friedman calls himself a recovering lawyer. He retired early and started painting and volunteering at a dog shelter in Cleveland full-time. He's written lots of legal briefs, but now he writes for fun about something he cares about deeply. He calls his book, I Let the Dogs Out, a guidebook of sorts, right?
Well, it's more of a humorous take on a guidebook, I would say. It's really intended for fun. It can appeal to anyone who enjoys dogs, and it's sort of an all-purpose humor and photo book that also, I hope, sends a message about the desirability of supporting animal welfare. What you'll find is ostensibly a sort of a categorization of personality types of the various dogs, complete with pictures of the dogs I took care of who fit into that category for some reason. For instance, one of the mini chapters is titled Fashion Icons. It contains photographs of dogs with various items of apparel, things made specifically for dogs, together with a statement about why they are fashion conscious and why fashion means so much to them. You'll come across a dog with let's say, a typical sweater that one would put on a dog for cold weather, and it says available this fall at Barkdorf Goodman. This coat was a big hit on the runway in Paris last year. One is a dog looking at another, and the caption is, "That is so last season." Each of these mini chapters with various personality or behavioral traits begins with a short narrative, again, intended to be just tongue in cheek. For example, there's a category called class clown. There are always the troublemakers vying for attention with insolent antics. And it goes on from there. So it's basically fun approach to a serious topic. Insofar as sheltered dogs and their adoption and care are concerned, it enables people to look at the world of shelter dogs in a more upbeat fashion that I hope promotes adoption and a sensitivity toward the cause. I feel extremely strongly about it. In the bit of research and training that I've gone through, I learned that there is really a dearth of large corporate or foundation funding. Animal rights have not been a big item for many high worth companies, and so many shelters really rely on small-ish private donations to operate. The shelter in which I volunteer takes no government funding. It's a private animal welfare organization, and there aren't a lot of sources out there to provide significant contributions. By significant, I mean, 100,000 or more. If you look at organizations that are in favor with respect to large givers, it's usually focused on children, the elderly, the health of humans, etc., which is entirely appropriate. But in the area of animal rights, shelters, taking care of animals in need, it's just not been the focus of many large giving organizations.
Are you doing book signings?
I did one at a Barnes & Noble in town and have an author event that features about 20 local authors coming up this summer, and I'm hosting 2 public library events that include a discussion about the book, The Shelter World, and there will be an adoption event afterwards by the shelter with which I volunteer.
Nice work, James. Thank you. Jeffrey Tracy Sr. is a regular here at Page Publishing. He wrote a trilogy about his family. His first book, entitled The Family Reunited, is about how he found his father and 3 older brothers after years of separation. His second book, A Family Torn Apart, is about why his family was twice broken up. Now he's published his third book, entitled Brainwashed by Foster Parents. Jeffrey was forced to live in several states before he finally settled in Texas, where he lives today. So tell us what happened to your family.
Well, when I was 2, my family first separated, but when I was 6 years old, our family got reunited, and then when I was 11 years old, our family got separated again. When we lived in Kansas, my father had a horrible accident. Family spiraled downward, and then that led to alcoholism, abuse, and abandonment and poverty. And that's when I saw my family torn apart one by one. And then when I was 11, I was sent to foster parents. Mostly I stayed with the one foster parents, but they would ship me off, like when they'd go off on vacation or something, then they'd send me to another foster parent. So like 3 different other foster parents.
Well, the name of your book is Brainwashed by Foster Parents. How were you brainwashed?
I was like 12 years old when I was sent to the foster parents, and I was at a vulnerable age and very emotional, and my foster parents were very fanatic, religious foster parents, and they manipulated, coerced, and brainwashed me into joining their church and living according to their fanatic religious beliefs. I would almost list them as almost a cult. When I was 16, there was an emotional event that occurred, and that gave me the strength to leave. I had a dog that I got real attached to, and I guess I spent too much time with the dog, And when my dog got ill, I wouldn't go to church, so I'd stay with the dog to kind of nurse it. And they didn't like that, and so they sent me away. And then while I was away, they killed my dog.
I'm so sorry.
Life is what it is, but you have to be strong and you have to carry on. And I would tell myself that over and over again. At the end, I found out where my dad lived, and I ended up writing a letter for him, and I didn't know if he'd pick me up or not, but he ended up picking me up. So I stayed with him until I graduated from Southeastern. So out of the three stories, it started off, I was just with my mother, and I was 6 years old. I really didn't know I had other brothers until I met them in the first book, and it tells how we meet in the book. Then we moved to Kansas, and that's where we all got together. And then, like I said, after the horrible accident happened, we moved back to Ohio, and then that's when things kind of fell apart. And there was a traumatic event in the second book, and I ended up in the shelter, homeless shelter, and then I went to the foster care.
Jeez. Were you able to have a normal life?
Yes, I married my high school sweetheart, been happily married for 48 years. And I have a daughter, son, 6 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. I made a career out of the U.S. Postal Service. And after I retired and raised my family, I went after my dream of starting to write, and that's how I started writing the books. I got a 4th book that just now been accepted. Hopefully it'll be out in about 8 months.
You are such an inspiration to people who feel that they can't overcome, circumstances like this.
I go around smaller bookstores. The larger ones don't host my book signings because I'm not known enough. And I also have a contract with a Kroger store here in Houston and Texas and Dallas, and I go around doing book signings in the stores.
Good for you, Jeffrey. Thank you. Robbie Campbell is 92 years old. He's a World War II vet and always took an interest in politics and elections. But it was the election of Donald Trump and the way the president has been treated that really hit a nerve. It's why he wrote The Truth About Donald Trump.
Well, what caused me to do it is that I was just very much flabbergasted and very upset at the way the fake media and people were treating Trump about 5 months after he got into office. That I definitely just thought they were being dishonest, unfair, and biased, partisan, and I just wanted to try to help him by writing the book. In the book, I emphasize that Trump thinks and talks and acts like the World War II generation, my generation. I think that's what his success is. In my book, I mentioned that quite a few times, and people ask me about it more than anything else about my book. Of course, I 100% support him. I just think that he's been very, very mistreated. I think his policies are much better than the Democrat policies, and he's been very successful at the time that he's been in office, doing a great job for us, and I think he'll continue to do a great job, and I think he'll be elected in 2020. I think the tax law that he passed is right. I think so the border wall is right. I think him saying he's going to do something and then doing it, in many cases that he's accomplished that he said he would do it, he has done those things. That's unusual for Washington politicians, that they promise you something and then get it done.
And you think the media has treated him unfairly?
Yes, I think they've been very foolish about, the Democrats, I think, have just been awfully foolish about some of the things that they've said about him and the way they're treating him, that it's just very dishonest and partisan and biased. And, of course, I think it's divided the country. The Democrats have just been very foolish, I think, is the best way to describe him. And then I think he's been an outstanding leader and doing what he said he'd do. I've had 3 book signings at bookstores and sold a few of the books, quite a few of the books around Dallas, mainly my friends. I haven't had a big book signing, but I have had 3.
And you're going to keep going at 92?
Yes, I'm pretty healthy and doing pretty well, and I think I can last a few longer. Like I said, I served in World War II, and my 3 brothers served in World War II. We were all conservatives, and Of course, we're very loyal and support the country. World War II vets I don't think they're more important or special or anything, but World War II veterans support our country and support our president. I would say that the broad media has no credibility, especially MSNBC and CNN. I think they're very dishonest.
All right, Robbie, thank you. Finally, Rita Kent is an artist, and it was through doing illustrations for 2 children's books for a friend that she got the idea for her own children's book. It is entitled The Rocking Horse, so I guess a light bulb went off, huh?
Well, after illustrating the 2 books, I had one sentence that just kept nagging at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I couldn't get rid of it, and I called my girlfriend that wrote the books that I illustrated for, and she said, just sit down at the computer and let it flow. And so that's what I did, and this is what came out of it.
And it's?
Well, it's about a little girl using her imagination. Every time she gets on her rocking horse, she kind of goes into her fantasy forest and meets animals, asks questions. And she talks to a violet and a rabbit and a deer and an old owl and a fairy. She notices that things are different there than at her home, and she's wondering why the deer is going into his burrow a little bit more often, or his den, and she finds out that it's actually starting to be the season of fall there. So she goes back home, and it's still summer where she lives.
So she learns that when it's cold, that animals just instinctively know that it's time to hibernate.
Right. The leaves start to turn and that type of thing. What I do with the books as far as the illustrations is that I find children that fit the story, and then I put them in poses according to what the storyline is, and then I put them in the background of the story. And so it's quite a process of getting the right things to go into the illustrations. Everything is computerized, and they're on their tablets all the time, and they need to use their imaginations and run around a little bit more and explore.
All right, Rita, can't argue with that. We got to run. This is the Page Publishing Book Club. If you missed anything, go to 710WOR.com for the podcast. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.